how's everybody doing today?
Good morning.
No, how's everybody doing today? All right, first things first, since we're all here and we're all in South Florida time, everyone stand up. Come on, stand up. Stand up. Now stretch. There you go. Aren't you glad I did that? Good, now let's sit down and go. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you all coming to the first panel of the day. This is the one, I think, when we were planning this conference, everyone was like, I want to be in on that. Because it's the topic everyone's got questions about, and all of us prognosticators think we have answers. So, the idea with this panel is we want to talk about rescheduling, but we don't want to talk about rescheduling. We want to talk about what happens after rescheduling. What's the industry look like next? Hence, Cannabis 3.0. So here we want to explore the legal and commercial implications of rescheduling from Schedule 3 or Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The goal of the panel is to provide insight into how the cannabis industry will evolve after rescheduling and what the next steps look like. If you're an operator, if you're an ancillary, if you're in funding, if you're in finance, etc. I have a fantastic panel up here with me of folks that are in the industry, have been working in the industry for years. I won't even do it justice, so we'll start with Roz and we'll give everyone a chance to just take a minute or two to introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'll be quick. Good morning, I'm Roz McCarthy. I'm the founder and the CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, as well as the founder and the CEO of Black Buddha Cannabis. I started M4MM in 2016 here in Florida, in Orlando. So I've been an advocate on the policy side for 8 years now, fighting for reform. And this is what rescheduling means to me, the gateway to reform. So good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Shapiro. I'm the EVP Legal for Ascend Wellness Holdings, a multi-state operator. Before that, I was the Associate General Counsel for a company called Green Lane, which is a third-party house of brands and distribution company in the cannabis ancillary space. I've been in the industry about 6 years.
Awesome.
My name is Sally Peebles. I'm with the law firm of Vicente. We were formerly Vicente Cedarburg. And we have a big policy department, so we actually have someone in our law firm who's dedicated working on the rescheduling issues. She's acting as a White House liaison. And she gave me her notes yesterday, so I'll be well briefed. But I have an office in Florida, and I work with Colorado, Oregon, and Florida companies doing M&A and corporate and real estate and all the boring stuff that you need.
Fair enough. Awesome. So, as I said, we've got
You need to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So my name is Zach Kobrin. I'm a partner at Saul Ewing, which is a large national firm with a large national cannabis practice. I've been working in and around the cannabis industry for a decade. I've been in-house for 2 public MSOs. First one I helped take public. The second one I helped spearhead one of the largest acquisitions in the cannabis industry. So I've seen all ends of the spectrum, from startup to, big behemoth corporation. So we have a very broad approach and a broad perspective on the industry, which I think was important for some of the topics we want to talk about. I think first comes first, let's deal with housekeeping, and let's talk a little bit about the rescheduling process. Kind of what it is, where it's at. Sally, why don't we start with Sally, and why don't you kind of give us just a 10,000-foot overview of what the rescheduling process is?
Well, Biden kicked this off back in late 2022, where he asked HHS and the DEA to focus on cannabis reform and look at rescheduling. And then HHS, about 8 months later, directed the DEA to schedule marijuana from 1 to 3. That was their recommendation. At the time, we just had the recommendation. There was an attorney friend of mine sued to make sure we could get that medical research public, so we can see why they did that. That's very key to this. And that was released a few months later. And then the DEA issued its proposed rule. That kicked off a 60-day comment period. And I think, was it 40,000? Something crazy. I mean, 43,000 comments were submitted. That is unheard of. It's the most any of the DEA's ever received on any sort of proposed rule. And we were hoping, the whole industry, the big talk during that comment period was, well, are they going to just issue the final rule and just reschedule it right after that, looking at all these comments, which were, by the way, 93% pro rescheduling it. But they didn't. Instead, they took the other pathway, which was probably expected, and scheduled an administrative hearing. Another kind of upsetting moment for the industry was that it wasn't scheduled for before the election. It was scheduled for December 2nd, after the election. So that's the next process. There will be a trial, basically. There'll be people putting on evidence on both sides. The opposition is very, very well organized. And so we need to make sure that we are well organized. And I think a lot of people just think there's someone out there doing that. We need to make sure that they're well financed and that we have a team putting on evidence for us. And at the end of that, the DEA will look at everything from the HHS recommendation through the trial, all the comments. That's going to take a lot of time, 43,000 comments, and then they'll issue their final rule. I think it's 30 days after that it goes into effect. Well, guess what's probably going to happen in those 30 days? People are going to sue. So that litigation may or may not stay. The final rule being final, which means if they are successful in staying, then we're looking at another long time period. I know that sounds like I want to get all that out because it's very key. One of the questions I get, the number one question is, when is this going to happen? It's not going to happen for some time. Like the earliest it could happen would be Q1 of 2025, but most likely with litigation, we're looking at the end of the year. Another problematic piece.
It's also important to point out that's actually normal.
Yes. Yes, actually, this is just, if that actually happens in the next year, this is the speed of light. I think the average time for something like this to happen is about 9 years. So if this actually happens this quickly, that means we do have a good team in place and we are making some progress. The key to know, there is I think it's called the congressional, something Congress can do. It's like the CRA. They can actually, when all is said and done, just throw it out. Not likely that will happen because of that 93% positive comments, but it could happen. So we just need to make sure that if you're focused on this and your company will benefit from the 280E, that you are putting money towards this and you are paying attention. Because it's not someone's not just out there taking care of this for you.
So we understand now that it's a big cluster mess and there's a whole lot going on, but let's actually talk about rescheduling itself. Roz, you've been an advocate and a business owner, so you kind of hit all ends of the spectrum. Talk to us a little bit about what rescheduling actually does and what rescheduling doesn't do.
Yeah, and I have notes on that so that I cover everything. The biggest thing with rescheduling, in my opinion, is that it opens up the door for more research. It basically validates that this plant that we all love has a medical that is valid from a medical standpoint, right? It's been on Schedule 1 that's basically said there's no medical aspects to it. I'm a living, not only an advocate and not only a business owner, but also a patient. In 2022, I suffered a traumatic brain injury, and I was talking to Sally about this. We were talking about memory, and I'm like, I forget things. I have to have notes because I was in a car accident, suffered a traumatic brain injury. If it were not for the plant, in order to help release that pressure in my brain when I would have those moments with a TBI moment, I don't think I would be here today. So rescheduling from a patient standpoint, let's just cut out the business, let's cut out all the other stuff, but from a patient standpoint, and being able to really research this, right now there's a monopoly on the research that happens for marijuana. NIDA, NIDA, is the arm of the federal government that does the research. So if you open up and reschedule to a 3 or a 4, honestly, we want it descheduled. Everybody in the room who wants descheduling, raise your hand, right? That's it. That's what we want, right? Some of my advocate friends who are strong social justice, strong equity, or what have you, have kind of given me the old because Raj, you're supporting rescheduling. The pragmatic side of myself in knowing our politics, if I thought that descheduling would happen, I'm all on board for it. But it's the rescheduling, I think, that opens up the framework for more reform, like Safer Banking Act, like other different acts that can be able to support rescheduling. So for me, to be honest with you, one of the areas that I'm really concerned about is on the medical side. It is also on the business side. We reschedule 280E as a tax code is literally transitioned so that if you're a business owner touching the plant, you're able now to have regular business deductions just like any other business. We should, I mean, have you ever seen an industry that has created so much revenue, that has created so many jobs, that has created so much impact opportunity, yet still is not able to function as any other business in the United States?
Does everybody understand what 280E is? Does
Yeah.
anyone not, and legitimate question, does anyone not know what 280E is? Okay, good.
Yeah. So that all those write-offs, that this is a fundamental right of businesses in capitalism in our country. And imagine an industry that's as large as our industry not being able to even exercise those opportunities to be cash positive. It's an atrocity. It's shameful. So I'll stop. I'll get off my pulpit right there. But those are some of the issues that really we need to understand what 280E, rescheduling does for us automatically. For consumers and patients, we may not see that trickle down effect. It may take a while for the research to really kick in, to really be able to codify some of those opportunities that the patients will be able to see. And then we go from there.
You bring up a good point, and I guess I'll throw it to Dan or to Roz. What are some of the shortcomings of rescheduling? Like, what is, we know what rescheduling will do. It'll do away with 280E, maybe it'll open up capital markets, some, other potential benefits. But what are the things that rescheduling won't do?
So I think the biggest thing is it's still federally illegal. There is still going to be a tension between states and the federal law. The rescheduling process, as Roz outlined, will take cannabis from Schedule 1, akin to heroin, and place it along anabolic steroids, Tylenol with codeine, things of that nature that have a medicinal value and can be prescribed, but it still does not touch, absent additional congressional action, the federal illegality of the plant. So I think first and foremost for me, as a consumer, as a lawyer for a publicly traded cannabis company, and just as someone interested in the industry generally, I'm most curious how that tension operates, and I think it's easily the biggest shortcoming of rescheduling. I would say the second aspect that I think a lot of people have concern about is pharmaceutical industry entering the cannabis space. It's not an accident that I mentioned Tylenol with codeine, anabolic steroids, things that major multi-billion dollar pharmaceutical companies promulgate and sell in the open market. If you put cannabis along the lines of those products, there is certainly a legitimate concern that the pharmaceutical industry could enter the space. Now, I think that's a much bigger conversation, and I truthfully think there are some positives and some negatives to bigger businesses continuing to get involved, but I think those are kind of the two main things that I hear and see from speaking with people as a concern.
So I think it's important to note, right, that the scheduling process and how the DEA regulates is basically a pharmaceutical or nutraceutical model, right? So when you think about like Walgreens or CVS or any pharmaceutical company or a company that makes an over-the-counter drug, they have DEA licensing to do what they do, right? So one of the questions that I hear a lot is under Schedule 3, arguably, anybody producing and distributing a Schedule 3 narcotic, a Schedule 3 drug would be required to have DEA license. Well, that creates a real gray area or question, right? And the larger gray question is, what is the relationship with an industry that has developed in a state legal model, basically skipping the federal government because it's still federally illegal? If they reschedule, what's going to happen? What's the impact on the existing state legal model? And there's been 1,000 different answers, but I mean, Sally, what's your thoughts?
Well, so I get calls. Am I going to have to get a DEA license? And these are from my operating companies. You can't get a DEA license. any company that's operated and been breaking federal law is therefore banned from getting a DEA license, unless the DEA makes some change in their policy. But if you have to, it's like one of those, click the box. If you've broken federal law, you are now cannot get a DEA license. So maybe there could be an argument that new entrants have to, but that's not generally the question on the table, right? So I think.
So is it fair to say that like the DEA or Congress or whoever at the federal level, they're going to have to not only reschedule, but implement some kind of regulatory reform?
That's that part.
But will they have to?
Yes.
We're already operating in adversity to federal law, and everyone's moving forward, okay? We get 280E taken away. Do we even care? You just still operate in adversity to federal law. Nothing changes, and I think that's really important for people to get. I get a lot of calls like, oh my God, Schedule 3 is gonna be awful. You know, we're all gonna be shut down. Why the heck? The federal government can shut us down today, okay? We are operating under Schedule 1. I mean, that we're breaking Schedule 1, all the laws that come with that, all the penalties that come with that. Why would the federal government wait for us to shift into Schedule 3 and then be like, well, it's a lesser penalty, why don't we go ahead and go after them now? It just doesn't make rational sense. Could it happen? Sure, but it doesn't make sense that they would decide to enforce federal law once we've shifted into Schedule 3.
So it's important to note, so years ago, the federal government took a position that they basically were going to take a hands-off approach towards legalized cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've all heard about the Cole memo, we've all heard about different policy positions, but the broad sense is the federal government doesn't want to utilize federal resources to prosecute. But Dan, as someone who's running the legal department for a large cannabis operator, right? I guess, what are the worries or what are the thoughts you guys have post rescheduling? What does, and this is, again, prognosticating at its best, right? What do you think the resulting relationship will be between state legal regimes and the federal government? Is it going to be status quo? Do you think something's going to happen?
Yeah, so I think I would break it down into a few points. I think number one, the general approach is the way we all handle our day-to-day, which is there is just inherent risk in pretty much everything that we're doing, and we have to be comfortable with that. I think the second part of it is a short-term view, where I agree completely with Sally that I would be shocked if in the near term the federal government decided to go into very robust, lucrative state legal markets and just completely flip the table over on them. Longer term, though, I think there absolutely would need to be some accompanying congressional action to codify what the new regulatory scheme looks like. And I don't think anyone can tell you with any real intelligence at the moment what that would look like. There are a ton of people who have ideas. There are a ton of people who are advocating for certain positions. I'm sure everyone on this stage has a preference as to the way that would go, but there's absolutely no real indication of what it would look like. So kind of in summary, short term, the way I operate is I would be shocked if any state legal markets were really upended. But longer term, I think that risk just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I think there will have to be some type of congressional action, whether it's a safer banking, whether it's a renewed Cole memo with greater detail. And I think it all will really depend too on what the rescheduling timeline looks like and then some of the specifics of those rules as they're promulgated.
So let's do a quick fire for the group, right? So the first two questions, right? First question being, post rescheduling, are existing operators, the ones who are operating under a legal license, a license from a legal state regime, are they going to be required to get DEA license? Roz, yes or no? What do you think?
I think no.
Dan?
No.
Sally? Okay.
They can't.
The second question, which would obviate your point, do we think that there is going to be any kind of federal policy change that, from a legal perspective, beyond what the federal government does or doesn't do, but from a strictly legal perspective, do we think that the federal government is actually going to implement policy that takes into consideration and preserves states operating their own legal regimes?
So,
Loaded question, but yes or no?
yes or no? I can't say.
What do you think?
We have to have it, but no, I don't think we will get there. I think
It's
we are
such
going
an
to.
honest answer. I love it.
Yes.
All right. Sally, what do you think?
It pains me.
Well, I think that it's a point of confusion, or just a lot of people think there's like a conspiracy, like a government conspiracy against marijuana. Guys, they just don't care. Okay, it's just not on their radar. They've got other issues that are bigger. So I think if they are they're not gonna take the time to redo a bunch of federal policy. But I think what is likely is we'll see like something like the Cole memo. You know, because that's just a memo they have to draft, right? Which will just, hopefully, even while banking's not going to really change, and there's not going to be any export or import changes, you're not going to have interstate activity. Like none of those things are going to change under rescheduling. But some of those, the enforcement of it could lessen if we have some sort of memo that says the federal government will not, reinforcing what the Cole memo said, that they will.
So no legal regulatory change, but
I don't think so, but I
just
think
a
they will do
policy
a policy change. I think
But-
that's like the low-hanging fruit.
But imagine if you could have a codifying of the Cole memo and then maybe get safer banking passed, right? These are like all dog whistles for our industry, because at the end of the day, having some reform will open up the industry, especially for those folks that are lacking capital. We have folks that want to invest in our industry, but choose not to, and because of the threat of being labeled as someone that's laundering money and all the other different, things that are related. So, I remain forever the optimist and hopeful that, and we do the work too. So mind you, it's not just like poof, it happens, magic dragon. You have to be in DC. You have to be carrying favor, talking to the congressional folks. This is not on their radar. However, state by state, the state of Florida is in the midst of legalization efforts right now. That carries some weight, right? And so if we pull a little bit, maybe we can get some incremental reform that we haven't seen in over 50 years. And that's why I remain optimistic, because I feel like where we're going right now in the last 5 to 7 years is such a stronger position than we've seen in over the last 50 years.
So one of the other areas that I hear often about how rescheduling may or may not impact is research, right? So I want to ask a whole bunch of questions to the panel, but I want to tell us a brief story. So like 5 or 6 years ago, I went to Israel, and we were meeting with the agriculture ministers and everyone behind their state government-run cannabis program. And it dawned on us very quickly that in Israel, they dove headfirst into research and development and couldn't quite figure out commercialization. Mm-hmm. And the US was the exact opposite. The US skipped research and development altogether and went straight into commercialization. And the obvious is like, the typical pharmaceutical model is you find an ailment, and then you find some compound or protein or an enzyme that you say will target that specific ailment, right? This X fixes Y. And then you research it, and then you do studies on it, and then you get approval for it, and the FDA says go. In the cannabis industry, there's hundreds of cannabinoids, right? Now, how many times have we taken a product and it says, great for aches and pains, or great for digestion issues, or great. We don't know what cannabinoids they are, we just know it's this product.
It works.
Right. So I always think, when the question of research comes in, I always think about that perspective of how do we put the genie back in the bottle of commercialization to actually flourish in research? And it's a super loaded question, so I hate to ask these questions, but we kind of have to talk about it. So from a rescheduling perspective, right, what kind of impact, and I want to start with Dan, and we'll kind of work our way around, but how does rescheduling impact the research and development and opportunities for cannabis research?
Yeah, so right now, Schedule 1 substances are nearly impossible to research in any capacity. You have to have a DEA license, and then there's hundreds of ridiculous requirements and standards to the point where it's essentially undoable. It's not cost effective. There aren't doctors and researchers who really want to spend the time and energy and jump through the hoops. Moving to Schedule 3 makes it significantly easier. I do want to point out that you would still need a DEA license to conduct research for pharmaceuticals like Schedule 3. So it's not just wild, wild west. But it makes it a lot cheaper, it makes it a lot easier, and it will open up, most importantly, I think, the number of institutions who are doing work on the subject. There are very few technological advancements in human history where only 5 people in one room are working on the subject. One group might succeed and 500 others might fail, but all of them are happening concurrently. I think for the last however many years, there's really only one institution, I think it's the University of Ole Miss, there's really one institution that's doing major cannabis research in any capacity.
That's federally funded.
That's federally funded, yeah. Certainly, I'm sure there are things going on otherwise. But you move to Schedule 3 and that number will dramatically increase. And I think one component of research too is not just the medical potential, but I think the optics of the industry generally can be benefited greatly by research. You couple the research with Schedule 3, the public perception that it is medicine. You have university professors and institutions that people who don't care about cannabis at all, but historically have been taught to respect. And then it's sort of a snowball effect. You have more and more people who are not a lawyer in the cannabis space or an activist in the cannabis space or business owner, but you have a science professor. And those types of things really matter to a lot of people. Maybe, for us, people in this room, I know for me, I lose sight of the fact, having been in this industry for a while, kind of to Sally's point, a lot of the reaction to the industry is less disdain and more just apathy. The people just aren't aware of it. They don't care that much. They're kind of fine. They'd be happy to be pushed in the direction you want. So the more people that aren't deemed to kind of be cannabis people talking about the benefits and the potential cures and opportunities, I think is beneficial.
So, Roz, what's your thoughts?
My thoughts is along those same lines. I agree 100%. Also, the medical insurance capabilities, opportunities to look at and pursue. My background prior to coming into cannabis, I spent 10 years with Bristol Myers Squibb in the pharma industry. I spent another 8 years in end-of-life care with hospice. It was the best experience for me. I wasn't a caregiver, I wasn't a practitioner, I was on the business development side, right? And the gift of hospice in supporting people that are going through end of life is something incredible. And so right now, hospice being a Medicare benefit, right? So hospice is paid for 100% by your Medicare benefits. If you're deemed terminally, with a terminal illness, those benefits kick in and all of your care, all of your hospital, everything, your medicine, everything is covered, except cannabis. And think about, I've seen people pass away.
Which is nuts, by the way.
Which is nuts, right? I lost my mom to breast cancer, and I saw her decline, and I saw the medicine they had her on. I saw the anxiety. You never know exactly how our plant and this medicine can be such a benefit until you see other medicines that don't do what they're supposed to do. And everything about your end-of-life care, we're all, we have a beginning and we all gonna have an ending. And I don't wanna be so morbid, but that's the gift of life, right? That's life, and it's a beautiful thing. And we want the gift of life at the end of life to be quality, to be peaceful, and I know that this plant can provide that because I've seen the converse. So so as you're talking about this, and we talk about rescheduling, there are some benefits that may support a lot of patients out here now, that not only the research, but just having the ability to have access to this plant. And on the medical insurance side, I think it's something that we should think about and should be concerned about.
I'll add something. So research is another, indeed, maybe some restrictions on research could be lifted. I stand strong when I say that I think rescheduling really just, the only change will be really 280E. That makes a difference. Potentially opening up some research, but what people should know, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, the Cannabidiol and Marijuana Research Act came out, and it was like, this is so great. Well, guys, that was drafted by Kevin Sabet, which is from Sam. He's our
Yes.
number one biggest
Competitor.
adversary.
Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
he drafted that. And what he did was make it so the restrictions on research were tied to marijuana itself, the substance marijuana. He removed it, the restrictions being whether or not it was Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So actually, moving it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 no longer will affect our ability to research. It actually makes it, that research will now just, if it's marijuana, those restrictions and that process now attached to marijuana, whether or not it's through 1 through 3. So it actually made it harder. So I don't know if we'll see that much research benefits. I hope we will, but I think if we do, it's mainly because if we see some sort of like I said, Cole memo policy change that says, and also at the end of the day, it will it may reduce stigma. I know in my very conservative neighborhood where I live in Jacksonville, the whole city is conservative. It's not my fault.
I blame you, Saul.
I go to any of my meetings, any of my dinner parties, and I think
Yet
the
they're all
biggest
popping
thing,
edibles.
screw rescheduling. The biggest thing that's really going to help Trump saying that he's for marijuana. I mean, that has changed the stigma more than rescheduling ever will.
So
I think.
let's. I want to one more question for the group on the rescheduling, and I want to move on. But so I mean on the research side, right? So do we think that rescheduling will open up FDA-approved and FDA-sponsored research and development programs, like you see with pharmaceutical companies, like you see with research hospitals and medical institutions? I mean, Roz, what do you think? Do you think the FDA will get behind sponsoring research programs?
I do.
Dan?
At some point, I think, yes.
Sally?
Hopefully.
You all are so definitive.
I said I do, but I think with anything that,
Roz.
there's a process to progress,
Roz
guys.
gets a sticker.
Right,
There is a
right.
process.
I said I do because I do believe it will happen, but we also have to set our expectations in regards to when the timeline for that to happen. And we're in this microwave generation that I want it right now. Listen, my 20-year-old, I want it right now. I gotta have it. And this fight and what we're focused on is not microwave popcorn. It's not gonna 2 minutes put it into the microwave and it's ready to go. And so we have to like
the old days where you gotta put it in the pot.
Yeah, you gotta kind of swirl it around a little bit, put your salt on there.
That's a good
I
analogy.
mean, honestly, but Sally's point is like in regards to even the research bill, there's some things, some nuances to rescheduling that we need to consider. And that's why having policy people, because yes, Kevin he's up in DC all the time. And honestly, congressional folks don't know stuff. They don't know this. They don't know what we know. And so if we're not there providing the converse to some of the stigma and some of the propaganda that's out there and being able to give them another option, we're going to be swirling for a while. And that's why the resources, that's why having diverse voices, it can't be just all middle-aged white guys that are in front of Congress. It has to be women, it has to be patients, it has to be people of color. It has to be us all being very vigilant and very intentional about that connection with our Congress.
So one of the other issues that I hear in addition to research, and I guess this is an issue that we've seen not just attached to rescheduling, but throughout the cannabis industry. And I want to talk a little bit about social equity. Social equity is an important topic. To some, it's a topic that you just talk about to get the headlines. To others, it is a lifeline issue. I get beat up all the time when I tell people this, but I am a big believer that social equity as a lawyer and from a regulatory perspective has been an abject failure in almost every market. I have not seen one social, and I'm sure there are, but to me, I have not seen many social equity programs that result in those truly been disadvantaged or incarcerated, resulting in a successful operation, right? Like the capital's an issue, the licensing an issue, everything becomes an issue. I preface all that with, I want to talk about the impact rescheduling may or may not have on the social equity and social equity issues that the industry faces. So, Roz, let's stick with you. I mean, what kind of impact in your mind do you think rescheduling will or will not have
Right.
I mean, the answer may be nothing. But
Right,
what do
well-
you think it will have on?
Well, I kind of agree with you in regards to the programs. The programs we see on the equity side have all been state-based programs, right? So there weren't federal programs. This was the argument from our industry, from advocates saying, listen, if you've been incarcerated, if you've been harmed due to the war on drugs, you should have an opportunity. And it was, I mean, just because it hasn't worked doesn't mean it wasn't the right thing to do, right? Just because it's still trying to find its legs doesn't mean that we don't do it. Because guess what? I'm 55 years old. In 20 years, 30 years, I may not be here to see the growth or the trajectory of where equity can go to. But if you don't plant your seeds right now, you're not going to see the growth where you want to see. The timbers that we see, the sequoia trees, they don't, like, it takes years to be able to blossom and so that's where my concern is in regards to where we are from a equity position, and rescheduling, in my opinion, won't change the trajectory. But what rescheduling across the board is a dog whistle, a signal to the state programs, to state lawmakers, to state communities, stakeholders. Listen, stop demonizing this plant. Stop creating stigmas. You know, the BS that Florida went through when we first passed Amendment 2, all my Floridians here, you remember Amendment 2, and being in Tallahassee, and people are trying to micromanage a program. It was straight bullshit. Excuse my language, but it was a hot mess. Now, 8 years later, they're more open, they're more talking about social justice reform, they're more asking questions, they're more talking about having horizontal businesses and not just vertical integrated, no more nurseryman, no more 30 years. It was a microaggression that was just bullshit. And so the things that rescheduling will do is sometimes it's not on paper, it's to creating the dynamic and the conversation and say, listen, we got to move past this. So one thing that I think rescheduling will do quickly is on the social justice side of figuring out criminalizing the social justice reform that's needed to make sure we repair those harms.
So social justice is a really good point, right? And so I don't know if everyone remembers, so a couple years ago when Biden first came out and started talking about cannabis reforms, he had an executive order that he wanted to pardon those with simple cannabis arrests, right? And everyone was like, oh my God, it's great, the federal government's gonna start pardoning people. And what most people didn't realize is that amounted to like 6,000 or 7,000 people, right? Like, one, because most cannabis crimes are state crimes. They're not federal crimes. Most people didn't see the difference. Two, and this is the unfortunateness of it, right? And I mean, I commend the president for doing something, but a lot of us thought didn't go far enough. Those that were arrested at for a federal crime, most of the time, you're not just arrested for having a quarter in, a pot. Like, if you're arrested as a federal crime, it's
trafficking.
You're trafficking that product. You were moving guns, or you were convicted with something else, and you weren't going to get pardoned because you had something else there. So the big question also, and I guess Sally, I want your thoughts on it, on the social justice side.
Well,
do we think that rescheduling will spur more states to do more pardons?
Well, so just like I said with research, there are some, but most laws have penalties for crimes that have to do with marijuana as a substance. They're not penalizing the person or considering what they did a crime because it's a Schedule I drug. So again, moving from Schedule I to Schedule III does very little for that aspect of it. Again, what Roz said is correct. Social stigma, I mean, like, hopefully that will, trigger the states to change their laws, which is really what we need to do.
Do you think the conversation will open up states to do more?
I don't think the states are going to do anything unless they have to. But sure, it might have legislatures be more persuaded. But that's key for people to understand. Like, people aren't going to jail in the state level because marijuana is a Schedule I drug. Yeah. They're going to jail because it's marijuana. So so until we change that, it's not going to have any effect on research or things.
All right, so without going down a rabbit hole that's going to open up into a massive conversation, I want to try and actually rein in this last piece to this.
Money, lending.
I don't even know what that signal was.
That was 2 minutes.
Yeah.
We're going to go way over because we started like 10 minutes late. So
lending.
Yeah.
Blending.
All right, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with politics, but no, I appreciate that. All right, we could talk about social justice, social equity a lot, but I want to get to some other nuts and bolts issues. And that's one of the things that we see as the three of us as lawyers, and I'm sure Roz is a business owner, is capital, right? We've all heard that capital is just dried up in the cannabis industry. So I'm going to start with Dan, since you are in-house and you are dealing with this on a daily basis. What kind of impact do you think rescheduling has on access to capital or capital investments in the cannabis space?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, 280E is a huge lifeline to the bottom line of a lot of businesses. And I also think coming off the social equity conversation, though, that's important because in a lot of these states, a lot of the social equity license holders are struggling getting access to capital. So if the general health of the industry, the financial health of the industry improves, it should be a bottom-up impact. That's certainly not limited to just social equity license holders, all license holders, but again, it will bring everyone up. Access to capital, first and foremost, is do you have a healthy business? If you're looking to get a mortgage and you've defaulted on every loan you've ever taken out, you're probably not going to get a mortgage. Same thing for any cannabis business. It is so difficult to operate a cannabis business for everything we've talked about that any incremental improvement will make you more desirable to anyone who is offering to give you money. So 280E is incredibly helpful. Getting slightly better terms from real estate agents, real estate lenders, mortgage, if you're retail, certain REITs won't work with certain cannabis companies. So it's kind of an amalgam of everything we've talked about where the stigma being removed a little bit, a little more certainty at the federal level with rescheduling, and improved balance sheet should hopefully in totality make it a little bit better. To echo a lot of what Sally's saying, it's not going to be an immediate, just massive jolt. Every financial institution in the country and world will start pouring money in. That's not the case. Financial institutions really respond to the health of the business and certainty. Hedge funds, pension funds, they're not going to feel comfortable with this industry, despite what a lot of people tell you for the most part, until there's more federal certainty. But before even getting to that, you need to have healthy businesses. You can't skip to two. And I think 280 immediately makes a major, major impact on a ton of businesses.
So that's a good point for you. I want to stick with Dan just for 2 points, and then we're going to open up to everyone. One, you just went through a financing, right? So you have dealt with large-scale financing and the issues. Do you think that rescheduling will create better accessibility or from more traditional financial institutions? We've seen a few banks that are doing, Valley's done them, Needham's done them, Safe Harbor's done them, where they've done small loans, $3-4 million to $50, $100 something million. Do you think rescheduling opens up better accessibility and better terms from financial institutions that maybe weren't willing to play?
I think to some degree, yes, not as much as many would hope. But I think, again, it goes back to the first point, which is before getting into what bank will talk with you, what institution will talk with you, you have to fix your business. Your business has to be a good business. I don't care if you're selling coconuts or shoes or shampoo. You could have 100 banks willing to talk to you, but if you're not making money, it will be zero. So I think the terms will get better because I think the businesses will be able to do better. I think from a federal perspective in rescheduling, I still think it remains TBD of whether that rescheduling effort will really comfort a number of large institutions that have still not sort of put their foot in the water yet.
So last question for Dan, and then I'm going to open up kind of a final question to everybody. Most of you may know, right? So the two biggest stock exchanges in the United States are NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. And not because there is a federal regulatory law that says they can't do it. It is exchange policy that the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ will not allow plant-touching operators in the U.S. So if you are Aurora and you have operations outside the U.S., you can list. But if you are Ascend and you have plant-touching operations in the U.S., you cannot list. So all these public companies, they list in Canadian, they list in NEO, they list in a number of other foreign exchanges. So as a public company, Dan, do you think that rescheduling, and I've been, personally, I've been a huge believer that the exchanges, New York and NASDAQ, are the single biggest barrier to opening up capital markets and a glut of financing. Opportunity, not money, but actual opportunity within the cannabis industry. To me, those dominoes fall, a lot falls after that. Do you think, representing a public company, do you think that rescheduling will be that, that needle to pop the balloon to open up the exchanges?
I think it's the first step. I don't know that anyone can feel comfortable saying yes, absent looking at what the text of the final promulgated rules outline, and if there is any additional congressional action, because of what you're describing, which is their rules are kind of their rules. Right. It's not sort of a, okay, this is Schedule 1, these are the 10 things, and you're moving it to Schedule 3. I think it's the first step. I think it will certainly improve the chances of that being the case. My former company is NASDAQ listed and is an ancillary business and got comfortable in the US exchange because it wasn't plant touching. So there is at least somewhat of a justification to kind of work toward that. But I know it's a very lawyerly answer of hedging, but
it's very definitive.
I can't be definitive about it.
No, I don't think any of us can.
No, none of us can. Yeah. But again, it goes back to my point. Like, we're in DC fighting for safer banking, right? Fighting for this act. And it supports depositories. And back to your question about will rescheduling, reduce fees and what have you. We've seen a reduction in banking fees, and we've seen kind of some leniency with some banks supporting our industry. But what needs to really happen is those institutional markets opening up. How can you have a bond program in New York when you don't have, and you're saying you're going to fund and have access to capital when there's no capital markets, right? And so there is my prayer and my hope is that rescheduling will light some fires, where we've seen some, I'll call out Senator Schumer, I'll call out some folks on the House side. We've seen some movement, but maybe we'll light a fire under them to not only have a Safe Banking Act as it's presented, but put capital markets, institutional markets there, protection, so that we create financial products so we have options. I don't want to have just, CRA loans and things of that nature. I want options. And so that's what I think rescheduling will do for us to be able to push some cannabis reform from a policy standpoint. Safe banking will be number one. And don't make it so pansy, load that sucker up. I'm sorry, Gary. Don't make it so pansy, but load that sucker up and let's get out there and be able to create. Then we can maybe see the success of some equity programs. Maybe we can see some of the promise that we've put out there.
So, all right, I'm going to open this. I know we're running short on time, so I want to open this question up to everyone. We'll start with Sally. And this is the ultimate loaded question. Right. And I'll say, keep your answers to about 2 minutes each, because I know we're short on time, and the guys are giving me the hook 10 minutes ago. So my question, and this is my loaded question. Looking in your crystal ball, 5 years from now, what does the cannabis industry look like after rescheduling?
I think in 5 years.
Positive, negative, good.
I think in 5 years, we might see descheduling. Maybe. That's probably me being Pollyanna. And if it is descheduled, we do need to remember that does not legalize marijuana industry all over the place. You still have to abide by the FDCA. You can't just sell products that are not FDA approved. So I think I'm Pollyanna. I think we're going to see descheduling in the next 5 years.
Really? Nice.
If rescheduling happens, Because we'll have a lot of people in Congress investing, and they'll want to make
Do
money.
you think the doom and gloom we all feel last year and a little bit this year is gone?
I do. I think that this is the most critical thing that's ever happened in marijuana policy, and I think that it's going to have a snowball effect.
All right, Dan, 5 years from now, what do you see, what's the industry look like?
I think it's a much healthier business, generally. I think the balance sheets, the operators from smaller operators to multi-state operators, both the United States and, sort of abroad coming off of the US, is just significantly healthier, top to bottom. Healthier culture, healthier balance sheets, healthier businesses, more M&A activity, more commercial partnerships. I think from a federal level, I think we're probably still in a Schedule III zone with a little bit more regulatory requirements, but I think clearer regulatory requirements.
All right, Roz, finish it out for us. 5 years from now, what does the industry look like?
5 years from now,
When you're 28.
yes, well, I'm 28. I don't see descheduling, but I do see a strong codifying of the Cole memo. I see safe banking with some strength and some teeth. What I see also is the states, especially in the Bible region, the Bible Belt states, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, where there's barely a medical program there. I still see states developing their programs to be state specific, because I do feel like the federal government will start still deferring states. This is your ball to carry. This is where you need to figure this stuff out, right? My prayer is that you will see state governors and leaders in municipalities have courage to release people from petty, minor marijuana-related offenses, right? I think if we could see that and be able to repair the harms on the social side, then we're making progress. And the industry itself, I would like to see the industry put more resources into, when 280E, if it's abolished and you don't have to deal with that anymore, don't take your profits and then just sew it back into your business, but don't forget the social impact of what this industry is about and what we have to do. As a nonprofit, I will tell you, it's skin, like we're like really just going by the skin of our teeth right now, and I'm hoping the industry will, like all rising tides, what they say, all boats, what is it? All rising tides?
Rising tides raise all
Yeah,
boats.
rising tides raise all boats. I'm hoping that as the industry rises,
think so.
that all boats will rise as well, so.
So, a couple closing points, and I just want to end with this, right? So, and Sally just said something to me, and ironically, and this is because Sally and I literally think the same way. I think, personally, we are moving towards an alcohol, and I actually agree with you.
Yeah.
We are moving towards an alcohol-based model.
It'll look like alcohol.
To me, that is the model that works, that preserves state regulatory regimes, that preserves big and small businesses, and creates an opportunity zone across the country, and balances federal and state regulatory and legal requirements. That's what I think. I would close with this. Up here, you have collectively decades of experience in the industry, as an operator, as lawyers, as all aspects of it, raising capital, selling, etc. And the opinions, while a lot were the same, are all over the map. And if you asked 1,000 different people, you'd get 1,000 different answers. The one thing we can say is rescheduling will be, the industry will be better than it would be without rescheduling.
100.
And I think it's going to be important for everybody to stay involved, stay as an advocate, stay aware, and understand. And when in doubt, call me so I can help you. Okay, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.